The night shift at NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Station was usually quiet. Dr. Emily Foster liked it that way. Just her coffee, and the endless streams of data from the cosmos. But on this cold October night, something changed. "That's strange," she muttered, adjusting her glasses as she stared at the screen. The readings from Jupiter's orbit showed unusual energy spikes. At first, she thought it might be a glitch in the system, but after running 3 separate checks, the data remained the same. Emily reached for her phone and dialed the military liaison's number. Colonel David Wright answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Colonel, I think you need to see this," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're picking up something big near Jupiter." Within an hour, the quiet monitoring station transformed into a hub of activity. Military personnel and scientists crowded around Emily's workstation, watching as more anomalies appeared on the screens. Could it be natural phenomena? Someone asked. Emily shook her head. "These patterns are too regular, too structured. Whatever this is, it's artificial." Colonel Wright stood with his arms crossed, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitors. "How long until whatever it is reaches Earth?" At current speeds, Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard. 3 days, maybe less. The news spread quickly through government channels. World leaders were notified, military forces went on high alert, and scientists worldwide began analyzing the data Emily had discovered. On the 3rd day, they came. The first ship appeared above New York City, a massive crystalline structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. More ships emerged from hyperspace, positioning themselves above major cities across the globe. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, like giant shards of dark ice suspended in the sky. Emily watched from the monitoring station as worldwide communications exploded with activity. Military jets scrambled worldwide, but they kept their distance, waiting for orders. The first message from the aliens came at exactly noon EST. It broadcast on all frequencies, in perfect English, and every other major Earth language. "People of Earth, we are the Vraxian Collective. Your world now belongs to us. Surrender, and you may survive as our subjects. Resist, and you will be eliminated. You have 6 Earth hours to comply." President Laura Martinez called an emergency meeting of her top advisors. Emily found herself sitting in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by military brass and government officials. "Dr. Foster," the president said, "you discovered them first. What can you tell us about these beings?" Emily projected her findings onto the main screen. The Vraxians, as they call themselves, appear to use crystalline-based technology. Their ships emit energy signatures unlike anything we've ever seen. They're highly advanced, but... She paused, highlighting a particular data set. There's something odd about their behavior patterns. They're incredibly precise, almost rigid in their movements and communications. Colonel Wright stepped forward. "Madam President, our initial military assessment suggests we're severely outgunned. Their ships have some kind of energy shielding we've never encountered." The president's face was grave as she looked around the room. Options. Before anyone could respond, screens worldwide flickered to life with another Vraxian broadcast. This time, they demonstrated their power. A small uninhabited island in the Pacific vanished in a flash of light, replaced by a perfect crater of glass. "That was a warning," the alien voice stated. "You have 5 hours remaining." Emily watched the data streams from the attack, her mind racing. Something about the energy signature seemed familiar, like a pattern she'd seen before in her research. She began typing furiously, comparing the readings to known phenomena. As the world's leaders debated humanity's response, Emily knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to survive this by matching the Vraxians' strength. They needed to be smarter. They needed to find a weakness. The clock was ticking, and humanity's darkest hour had begun. The world's answer to the Vraxians came not from politicians, but from the American Third Fleet in the Pacific. A destroyer captain, refusing to surrender his world without a fight, fired the first shot. His missile struck the crystalline ship above Tokyo and bounced off harmlessly. The Vraxians' response was swift and terrible. Major cities worldwide erupted in blue fire as energy beams cut through buildings like paper. In Chicago, Marine Corps Captain Robert Hayes watched from his command post as the downtown skyline burned. "Get those civilians underground," he shouted, pointing to the old subway tunnels. His Marines worked quickly, directing scared people down the stairs. Above them, the crystal ships hummed with deadly energy. At the NASA Command Center, Dr. Emily Foster worked frantically with her colleague, Dr. Brian Miller. They had noticed something strange about the Vraxian attacks. "Look here," Emily pointed to her screen. "Their weapons follow a pattern. They're not random at all. It's like they're following a preset program." Brian leaned closer, his tired eyes widening. "You're right. They hit the same types of targets in the same order. Military installations, power plants, communication centers, which means we might be able to predict their next move," Emily finished. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Captain Hayes and his Marines had set up a defensive position in the subway system. They watched through security cameras as robot-like crystal soldiers marched through the streets above. "Sir," one of his surgeons called out, "you need to see this." On the camera feed, they watched as a Vraxian soldier stepped on a fallen power line. For just a second, its crystalline form flickered and cracked. Hayes grabbed his radio. "All units, focus fire on areas with exposed electrical equipment. They react to electrical surges." Across the city, Marine units began using this weakness. They couldn't destroy the Vraxian troops, but they could damage them. It wasn't much, but it was the first good news in hours. Back at NASA, Emily received Hayes' report. She turned to Brian excitedly. "This confirms my theory. Their crystalline structure is vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic disturbance. But our current weapons aren't strong enough," Brian said, typing rapidly. "We need something much more powerful to affect their ships." Above them, through the reinforced windows, they could see the Vraxian ships moving in formation, methodically destroying everything in their path. The aliens were precise, efficient, and completely emotionless in their destruction. Colonel Wright entered the lab, his uniform dusty from the evacuation. "Dr. Foster, we're moving all essential personnel to the underground facility in Colorado. We need your research." "We can't leave yet," Emily insisted, showing him her findings. "Look at this data. The Vraxians, they're not just attacking. They're mining something. Their energy beams go deep into the Earth's crust." Wright studied the data. "What are they looking for?" "Energy," Brian answered. "These readings suggest they're tapping into Earth's core somehow. But why would such an advanced species need our planet's energy?" Their discussion was cut short by a massive explosion above. The ceiling cracked, and alarms blared throughout the facility. "We're out of time," Wright said firmly. "Grab what you need. We leave in 5 minutes." As they rushed to save their research data, Emily took one last look at the Vraxian ships through the window. Something about their behavior bothered her. They were too perfect, too predictable. And in that moment, she realized that might be their weakness. Humanity had lost the first battle, but they weren't defeated yet. In labs and bunkers across the world, people like Emily and Brian were beginning to understand their enemy. In the streets and tunnels, soldiers like Hayes were finding ways to fight back. The Vraxians had started this war expecting an easy victory. They were about to learn that humans were anything but predictable. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, humans had built their last hope. The old mining complex had become a buzzing center of resistance. 3 weeks had passed since the initial invasion, and survivors kept arriving through hidden tunnels. Lisa Chen worked in what used to be an old storage room, now turned into her workshop. Tools and electronic parts covered every surface. She hadn't slept properly in days, but she couldn't stop, not when she was so close to a breakthrough. "I think I've got something." She called out to Dr. Emily Foster, who was working nearby. Lisa held up a device that looked like a modified radio. If your data about their electromagnetic weakness is right, this might hurt them. Emily walked over, examining the device. An EMP generator. Better. Lisa smiled, her tired face lighting up. It's targeted. Regular EMPs would kill our equipment too. This one works on their specific frequency. Down the hallway, Captain Hayes led a group of new survivors into the base. His uniform was torn and dirty, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He had spent the last week guiding people through Vraxian patrols to reach the facility. The aliens are changing their patterns, he reported to Colonel Wright in the command center. They're learning, getting better at finding our hiding spots. Wright nodded gravely. We're seeing the same thing across all regions, but we're also getting better at fighting them. He pointed to a map showing underground bases like theirs scattered across the country. Green lines connected them, showing their hidden communication network. In another part of the base, Dr. Brian Miller made an important discovery. He rushed into the main lab where Emily and Lisa were working. "You need to see this," he said, spreading out papers on a table. "I've been analyzing their energy collection patterns. They're not just mining our core energy randomly. They're desperate for it." Emily studied the data. "What do you mean?" "Look at these readings," Brian pointed. "The amount of energy they're collecting, the way they're storing it. I think their civilization is dying. They need our planet's core energy to survive." This news spread quickly through the base. People gathered in small groups, discussing what it meant. Some saw it as a sign of hope, a weakness they could use. Others worried it would make the Vraxians even more dangerous. Lisa worked faster after hearing this. She brought her finished device to the testing area, a sealed chamber deep in the mine. They had captured a small piece of Vraxian technology during a raid. "Ready?" she asked, standing behind a protective shield with Emily and Brian. They nodded. Lisa pressed the button. The device hummed to life. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, cracks appeared in the Vraxian crystal. Within seconds, it shattered completely. "It works," Emily whispered. Then louder, "It works." The news brought hope to everyone in the base, but they knew making enough devices for a real fight would take time and resources they barely had. Captain Hayes organized more raids to gather materials. Each mission was dangerous. The Vraxians controlled the surface, and their patrols were everywhere. But each successful raid brought back more supplies, and more importantly, more information about their enemy. One evening, as Lisa worked on making more devices, she noticed something interesting. "The crystals don't just break," she told Emily. "They actually change structure when hit with the right frequency. Like they're alive somehow." Emily remembered how mechanical and perfect the Vraxians seemed. Maybe that's why they're so rigid in their behavior. Their whole civilization might be based on these perfect crystalline patterns. "And we're introducing chaos into their order," Lisa added, understanding dawning on her face. In the command center, Colonel Wright received reports from other bases. Similar discoveries were being made worldwide. Humanity was starting to understand their enemy, and with understanding came the first real chance of fighting back. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion, hope burned brightly in the underground depths of Earth. Dr. Emily Foster hadn't slept in 20 hours, but she couldn't stop now. The computer screen in front of her showed streams of Vraxian communications, beautiful patterns of light that she was finally beginning to understand. "Got you," she whispered, typing faster. After months of study, she had cracked their code. The Vraxians didn't use words like humans did. They communicated in pure mathematics, in crystal resonance patterns. She grabbed her radio. "Colonel Wright, I need everyone in the command center. Now." 10 minutes later, the base leaders gathered around her computer. Lisa Chen stood next to her, dark circles under her eyes but alert. Captain Hayes and Colonel Wright watched as Emily pulled up the decoded messages. "Look at this," Emily pointed to the screen. "They're not just giving orders. They're scared. Scared, Hayes leaned closer. Of what? Of us, Emily smiled. Every time we act unpredictably, it disrupts their entire command structure. They don't understand why we don't follow logical patterns like they do. In the workshop area nearby, Lisa's team had turned her prototype EMP device into something bigger. 20 finished weapons sat ready, each one capable of taking down a Vraxian patrol. "We're ready for a real test," Lisa said, "but we need to hit something bigger than just ground troops." Colonel Wright studied the base's main map. Red dots showed known Vraxian positions. Here, he pointed to a spot outside Denver. "They have a small outpost. Minimal guards, one ship on patrol." Captain Hayes started planning immediately. "My team can get in close. If Lisa's weapons work as well as the tests show." "They'll work," Lisa said firmly. The raid was set for midnight. Hayes led a team of 12 soldiers, each carrying one of Lisa's devices. Emily and Lisa watched from the command center as green dots on the screen showed the team's movement. The Vraxian outpost glowed with crystal light in the darkness. Hayes and his team moved silently through the ruins of Denver's suburbs. They had learned to avoid the regular patrol patterns of the Crystal Soldiers. "In position," Hayes whispered into his radio. "Now," Wright ordered. All 12 devices activated at once. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The crystal structures began to crack, their perfect patterns disrupted by Lisa's targeted EMPs. The Vraxian soldiers fell, their forms shattering like glass. The patrol ship above tried to respond, but its systems were already failing. "Direct hit," Hayes reported, his voice excited but controlled. "The outpost is down." "Repeat, the outpost is down." In the command center, people cheered. It was their first major victory against the invaders. But Emily was already focused on the next step. The decoded communications showed the Vraxians' confused response to the attack. "They can't understand what happened," she said, reading the patterns. "Their minds work in such perfect, logical ways that our guerrilla tactics make no sense to them." Lisa was already thinking ahead. "If we can build more weapons, make them stronger, we can take down their bigger ships," Wright finished. The news of the successful raid spread through the resistance network. Other bases began requesting Lisa's weapon designs. Underground factories started production. For the first time, humans had a real weapon against their invaders. But the Vraxians weren't defeated yet. Their response came 3 days later. Stronger patrols, new search patterns. Yet something had changed. Their perfect formation showed signs of disorder. Their responses were slower, less certain. "They're adapting," Hayes noted during a briefing. "But so are we." Emily studied the latest decoded messages. "Every time they try to create a perfect plan, we throw chaos into it. We're not just fighting their weapons, we're fighting their entire way of thinking." In the mountain base, hope grew stronger. Humanity had found its edge in this war, not in matching the Vraxians' power, but in being everything they weren't: unpredictable, adaptive, and willing to break all the rules to survive. The tide was beginning to turn. Colonel Wright stood in front of a digital map covering an entire wall. Red dots showed Vraxian positions, while blue dots marked human resistance bases. For the first time since the invasion, there were more blue dots than red. "Reports are coming in from all sectors," he announced to the room full of leaders. "London has taken down 3 crystal ships. Beijing has cleared their underground sectors. We're hitting them everywhere." Captain Hayes studied the map closely. His team had just returned from destroying a Vraxian communication tower. "They're getting sloppy," he said, "making mistakes we never saw before." In her lab, Dr. Emily Foster watched the latest Vraxian messages with growing excitement. "Their whole command structure is falling apart," she told Lisa Chen. "They can't handle fighting enemies on so many fronts." Lisa nodded, working on an improved version of her EMP weapon. "Good, because we're about to hit them even harder." The resistance had grown stronger each day. Underground factories worked non-stop, producing Lisa's weapons. Resistance fighters moved through secret tunnels, sharing supplies and information. The Vraxians still controlled the surface, but their grip was weakening. Dr. Brian Miller rushed into the lab, holding new data readings. The Vraxians are speeding up their core energy collection, he said, his face worried. They're getting desperate. Before they could discuss this, alarms blared through the base. A Vraxian patrol had discovered one of their hidden entrances. All combat teams to Sector 4. Wright's voice came over the speakers. This is not a drill. Hayes and his Marines moved quickly to defend the base. The sounds of battle echoed through the tunnels. Lysa's weapons worked well against the crystal soldiers, but there were many of them. In the lab, Brian made a quick decision. Get the research to the backup facility, he told Emily and Lisa. I'll wipe the computers here. But Emily started to protest. No time to argue, Brian said firmly. This data is too important. Go. As Emily and Lisa rushed to save their work, Brian stayed behind. He could hear the fighting getting closer. When Vraxian soldiers finally broke into the lab, he triggered an electromagnetic pulse that destroyed everything, including the invaders. But the cost was high. Brian didn't survive the blast. The base was saved, but Brian's loss hit everyone hard. During a memorial service, Colonel Wright made an announcement. Dr. Miller's sacrifice protected vital research, he said. And now we're going to use it. Operation Shatterpoint begins tomorrow. The plan was bold. While smaller teams kept hitting Vraxian patrols, Hayes would lead a special forces unit to capture a crystal command ship. They would need one intact to understand how the bigger ships worked. It's risky, Hayes told his team during briefing. But we've trained for this. The Vraxians are strong, but they're predictable. We're not. The next day, as the sun set, Hayes' team moved into position. They had studied Vraxian patrol patterns for weeks. They knew exactly when the command ship would pass overhead. Lisa's newest weapons were stronger than ever. The first shot hit the ship's lower section, disrupting its crystal structure. As it struggled to stay in the air, Hayes' team used grappling equipment to reach the ship. The fight inside was fierce but quick. The Vraxian crew couldn't adapt to human battle tactics. They expected their enemies to follow logical patterns. Instead, Hayes' team came from all directions, using chaos as a weapon. Within an hour, the ship was theirs. It was humanity's first captured Vraxian vessel. Emily immediately began studying the ship's systems. This is incredible, she said, examining the crystal technology. With this, we can finally understand how their bigger ships work. Lisa was already thinking of new weapons and how to bring them down. The victory sparked celebrations across all resistance bases, but Colonel Wright reminded everyone that the war wasn't over yet. We've won a great battle, he said, but the Vraxians still have their main fleet, and now they're more dangerous than ever because we've made them afraid. The storm of human resistance was growing stronger. The final battle was coming. The captured Vraxian ship became humanity's greatest weapon. In what used to be its control room, Lisa Chen and Dr. Emily Foster worked day and night, studying its crystal technology. Look at this, Lisa said, pointing to a pattern she had discovered. Their ships aren't just machines. The crystals are all connected, like one big nervous system. Emily nodded excitedly. And if we can disrupt that system. She paused, thinking about their lost friend. Brian was right all along. The Vraxians aren't just using crystal technology. They're part of it. In the base's main hall, Captain Hayes briefed his troops on their findings. The enemy isn't just an army, he explained. They're a hive mind. Each crystal soldier, each ship, is connected to all the others. That's why they're so organized, and why chaos hurts them so much. Colonel Wright studied the latest battle reports. Resistance forces worldwide were fighting back harder than ever, but the Vraxians had gathered their remaining ships into one massive fleet above the Atlantic Ocean. They're protecting something, Wright said, showing the fleet's position to his officers. All that core energy they've been collecting, it's going to that fleet. Lisa and Emily finally completed their work on a new weapon. They called it the resonance cannon. It wasn't just a bigger version of their old EMP devices. It was designed to target the very frequency that held the Vraxian crystal network together. If this works, Lisa explained to the base leaders, it won't just damage their ships, it will break their entire command structure. But we'll only get one shot, Emily added. They'll adapt quickly once they know what we're doing. Operation Shatterpoint entered its final phase. While Hayes led a ground assault on the Vraxians' main Earth base, other resistance forces worldwide prepared to strike all remaining crystal installations at once. The day of the attack dawned clear and cold. Hayes and his team moved through the ruins of Washington, D.C., approaching the crystal fortress the Vraxians had built over the old Pentagon. They carried the first resonance cannon, while other teams worldwide waited with copies of Lisa's device. Remember, Hayes told his soldiers, we're not just fighting with weapons. Our greatest strength is that we don't think like them. We're unpredictable. We're human. The attack began at noon. As Hayes's team struck the fortress head-on, other units hit it from underground tunnels. The Vraxians responded with their usual perfect formations, exactly as planned. Now, Hayes ordered. The resonance cannon fired. A wave of invisible energy swept through the crystal structures. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then cracks appeared in the fortress walls. The crystal soldiers began to twitch and shake. It's working. Lisa's voice came over the radio from the command center. Their network is breaking down. Across the world, other resistance teams fired their devices. The effect spread through the Vraxian crystal network like cracks in ice. Their perfect formations fell apart. Their ships began to lose power. In the command center, Emily watched the Vraxian communication patterns dissolve into chaos. They can't understand what's happening, she said. Their minds aren't built to handle this kind of disruption. The crystal fortress collapsed, its perfect structure shattering into thousands of pieces. Above, the Vraxian ships in low orbit began falling from the sky, their crystal cores darkened and dead. But the main fleet still hung above the Atlantic, protected by some kind of shield. And it was powering up something big, something that glowed with all the energy they had stolen from Earth's core. This isn't over, Wright said, watching the readings. They're preparing for one final attack, and if they use all that core energy at once, they could crack the planet apart. Emily finished. Hayes looked at the fallen fortress around him, then up at the glowing fleet above. Then we'll just have to stop them, he said. One last time. The final battle for Earth was about to begin. The Vraxian fleet hung in the sky like a crystal mountain, glowing with stolen Earth energy. Time was running out. In every resistance base worldwide, people watched their screens as the final battle began. Colonel Wright's voice crackled over the global resistance network. All units, this is it. Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment. Captain Hayes led the ground forces in a fleet of captured and modified Vraxian ships. Lisa Chen had worked miracles, turning the crystal technology against its makers. Dr. Emily Foster sat next to Hayes in the command ship, reading the enemy's patterns. They're desperate, Emily said, studying the data. All that power they're building up. They're planning to take Earth's core energy even if it destroys them too. The human fleet rose from bases worldwide, a mix of captured crystal ships and modified Earth aircraft. They were outnumbered, but they had something the Vraxians didn't understand: the will to fight chaos with chaos. All ships, break formation, Hayes ordered as they approached the crystal fleet. Attack pattern Omega, random vectors, just like we practiced. The human ships scattered, attacking from all directions. The Vraxians tried to form their usual perfect defense patterns, but they couldn't predict where the next attack would come from. In the command center below, Lisa worked frantically with her team. The improved resonance cannon was ready, but they needed to get closer to the main fleet. Their shield is too strong, she radioed to Hayes. We need to hit them from inside it. Hayes looked at his crew. They all nodded. They knew what had to be done. "We're going in," he said. "All ships, cover us." Their command ship dove straight toward the Crystal Fleet. Enemy fire flashed around them, but the Vraxians' perfect targeting systems couldn't handle their erratic flight path. Emily watched the enemy communications. "Their network is confused. They can't understand why we're willing to risk everything like this." They broke through the shield. Warning alarms blared as their ship's crystal components began to vibrate in harmony with the enemy fleet. They were now part of the Vraxian network. "Now, Lisa," Hayes shouted into the radio. Back in the command center, Lisa activated the resonance cannon. This time, its energy surged through the connected crystal network of the entire Vraxian fleet. The effect was immediate and devastating. Cracks appeared in the massive ships. The perfect crystal structures began to fall apart. The energy they had stolen from Earth's core spilled out in waves of blue light. "Emily," Hayes said quickly, "can you redirect that energy?" Emily's fingers flew over the controls. "Yes. The crystal network. We can use it to send the energy back where it belongs." Through the breaking crystal ships, streams of blue energy began flowing downward, back into the Earth. The Vraxian fleet dimmed as their stolen power returned to its source. But their command ship was still caught in the middle of it all, crystal components cracking. "We have to get out," Hayes ordered. "Everyone to the escape pods." They launched just as their ship shattered. Above them, the mighty Vraxian fleet was falling apart, their perfect crystal structure finally broken by human chaos and determination. As the escape pods descended, dawn broke over Earth. The sky was full of falling crystal shards that sparkled like snow in the morning light. In the command center, Lisa and Colonel Wright watched as energy readings returned to normal. Earth's core was healing itself. The Vraxian threat was over. Hours later, as cleanup began, Emily made a discovery in the remains of a crystal ship. "They left a final message," she said. They're surrendering. And more than that, they're asking for help." "Help?" Hayes asked. "Their world is dying," Emily explained. "That's why they needed our core energy. But they've seen how we adapt, how we find new solutions. They want to learn from us." Colonel Wright smiled. "Well, teaching is better than fighting. And maybe we can learn something from them too." As the sun rose higher, humanity began to rebuild. They had faced their darkest moment and emerged stronger. The crystal ships were gone from the sky, and Earth was free. In the end, it wasn't superior technology or perfect order that had won the war. It was humanity's greatest strengths: adaptability, determination, and the power of unpredictable, unstoppable hope.